Welcome everyone. Really excited to be here today to talk about an amazing topic, a rising topic, one that is impacting a lot of brands and retailers and how we go to market and how we need to go to market long term to win in this space. My name is Chris Perry. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at First Mover, but more importantly, I'm a passionate member of the Digital Shelf Institute Executive Forum that has put together, has collated this great experience and insight around the full revenue impact of retailer media and ad platforms. And we're so excited to share our passion for this topic with the ClickC marketing community. I'm joined by several panelists that I'm going to introduce momentarily, but I wanted just to tee up the topic we're going to be discussing today, as they're going to add a ton of color to what they've experienced on the front lines, both in their roles and as well as with additional clientele that we work with across Fortune 500 brands and startup brands. So it shouldn't surprise any of us that digital media spending is continuing to grow. That was true because consumers continue to become digital consumers in every aspect of their lives. But what might surprise you a little bit is how much more retail spending is growing in our markets as retailers are adding capabilities and capturing a greater and disproportionate share of the media spending because of a lot of nuances that they bring to the table. Closed loop reporting, direct attribution in many cases to the sales you can generate from that media spending, as well as partnership. Ultimately dedicating your spending as a brand to your retail partner adds a certain level of weight to where you decide and allocate your spending. So it shouldn't surprise us that this is growing, but ultimately it's because brand marketers, the vast majority in CPG and beyond, are now stating openly that the growth of their overall business depends on retail media advertising. And that wasn't true a few years ago when retail media was still a very present reality in a changing part of our ecosystem. But what I think most brand marketers have a difficult time articulating is the intuition for why their business depends on retail media. And that's because there is a greater value in many instances for retail media versus traditional media. It's not to say one trumps the other or we should only do one over the other, but that the value of retail media is greater and maybe hasn't been fully articulated, qualified, or even quantified, and should be, so that we're having apples to apples discussions. And that's actually what prompted the executive forum at the Digital Shelf Institute to tackle this challenge, right? This opportunity. The question came up from the group and it kind of culminated from a lot of different discussions around challenges leaders of change in e-commerce and digital marketing were having as they're pushing more into this retail media space, but getting pushback from finance and senior leadership around maybe we're investing too much. Maybe we flipped we're dilutive in our P&L. We can't invest that much and put all of our eggs, in one basket. And these are fair pushbacks, but it's because no one was looking at this holistically together. And so we asked the question, what is the full impact of retail media spend? And what was exciting, beyond the obvious, maybe more known impacts, right? Historically, we would invest in retailer media capabilities, A, because it's media, and B, because of the growth of e-commerce. There's the natural online sales that in most cases we're getting the data to validate is an outcome of the media that we're running with them. But all of us in the forum had various anecdotes, both recent and historical anecdotes, that validated these other areas of value, these other things that were coming out of the investment we were making. And so we like to call those the less known, but it's not that they're not known. It was just they might not have been articulated or crystallized or maybe even made official. And we actually identified 7 other areas of value that were kind of an aggregate of all these stories and facts and stats from industry reports and from other forum members. Everything from my retail partner gave us X, Y, and Z because we made this dedicated media investment with them. Or, hey, we did our media mix modeling analysis and we saw an amazing offline impact from what we thought was already good from a return on ad spend standpoint online. We saw extended offline, right? Some of this isn't new to us, but was new in that it became real and tangible and not just one-off legends and anecdotes, but real stats from lots of categories across lots of credible leaders. And so what we tried to do is put an initial framework together to help highlight what these values look like in kind of sequential order of impact. So when you make a retail media investment, there are short-term, mid-term, and long-term impacts that kind of feed off one another, that really create kind of the flywheel momentum you've probably heard about in the industry before, that flywheel effect. It's a ripple effect, which is why you see this rainbow folds out from something I might have done today, has multiple impacts tomorrow and beyond. And so I'm not going to go through all of them today, because we're going to get into that discussion about the ones that matter most to those on the front lines leading this charge. But I wanted to call out some of the obvious ones, but maybe some of the less obvious ones, because the power here is quite exciting as we try to make this more of a scientific approach. So again, we know there are online sales when we invest in an Amazon media campaign. Why? Because Amazon tells us that there's online impact, and we get some of the data to show that if we've been effective, we generated an impact. And so across categories, the return on ad spend varies. The ROI will vary based on price points, what you're targeting, who you're targeting, and a number of other factors. But online sales is a given. But what isn't always a given, even though it's assumed, is the offline sales. And that's because most of the time we haven't been able to spend enough in retail media in the right way to get a media mix model analysis to validate it. But where brands have done that, we've seen a range from both the brand side and even retailer studies that show that for every dollar earned online, generated anywhere from $6 to $11 offline. So again, we want to make this more scientific and maybe more specific to our own brands, but even if I took the conservative, that is a very strong ROI and ROAS I wasn't capturing before, only looking at online sales. But going back to that flywheel effect, if I spend effectively today in media and I generate a better sales rank and search rank on the digital shelf across my retail partners, I now am visible. I've earned visibility to people that didn't see my media. So I actually increase my digital visibility through earned media versus paid media because of my paid media, right? This goes back to traditional principles of digital marketing and media, but it works really well on the digital shelf. In a physical world, I can't impact my placement overnight, but online I can. I can become eye level overnight if I'm effective. So digital visibility is an important value we're not quite capturing today from media we spent yesterday. And we talked about offline sales, but offline placement is important too. Future offline sales. Retailers and brands are leveraging online data from their own sites and others to determine what they bring into the store. So long term, I, as a brand owner, might be in a key retailer partner because I was selling on Amazon quite well and performing at the top of the category. So we have lots of anecdotes here, stats and studies here that kind of validate that offline decision-making that's being made by the retail buyer community because of our online prowess. And then my favorite one personally is cost per acquisition efficiency. So again, going back to that flywheel, if I earn better visibility because of my paid investment today, I may not have to pay as much in the future because I'm actually more relevant and more visible, and I don't need to work as hard to acquire. Now I say that is more theory because that's the furthest out layer of value, but it's inherently true. And we already see that through a lot of partners like PackView, who provided a lot of really valuable advertising data to kind of validate some of these points. So there's so much value here. You can hear the passion in my own voice, having had to fight this argument internally. And again, I'm not here to prove that retail media needs to be overinvested, I would say unsustainably. I'm here to say we're probably underinvesting in a lot of cases because we're not having apples to apples discussions. And so that's just the little setup here, but I want to get right into the core of our content today. I'm joined by a number of amazing leaders in the industry. I'm going to let them introduce themselves officially, but excited to welcome Molly Chanthal, who's my co-author, head of the executive forum at the Digital Shelf Institute, VP of Community Marketing at Salsify. We obviously harness the brains of all these amazing people in the forum to bring this framework to light. I'm also excited to welcome John Denny, a pioneer of disruptive startup brands, VP of e-commerce and digital marketing at Cavu Venture Partners. as well as a member of the ClickC community, and also Kelsey Johnston, Director of US E-commerce at COTY, and a valued member of the forum. So I'm going to let each of them give a little more color and share a little bit of their passion for this space, but then we'll get right into the questions today. So Molly, why don't we start with you in consecutive order here?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And the context in which I come to this conversation is sort of twofold. One is Chris and I were both part of that conversation with several executives in the forum around how do I manage a P&L where I'm being asked to account for e-retail media as a purely trade spend, as a purely e-commerce focused investment, when I sense, whether or not I have proof that it is affecting the entire business from a holistic and bottom line point of view. So that's sort of like the first reason I'm super psyched about this conversation. The second is I come from Mars. I spent 8 years there, and most recently leading technology for e-commerce and digital marketing. So I had sort of a front row seat view of these kinds of conversations.
Wonderful. John, how about yourself?
Sure. So Chris, as you said, I lead e-commerce and digital marketing for Kavoo Venture Partners, working with about 20 fast growth challenger brands in our portfolio, particularly in the food, beverage, and CPG space. Before Kavoo, I headed up advertising, media, and e-com for Buy Beverages. So, Buy emerged and grew very rapidly. We were a startup challenger brand, and part of my passion for this topic is the fact that I came to this world as wearing my hat as a broader advertising and media professional, making choices about media to simply increase awareness, both upper funnel, mid funnel, lower funnel, and happened to be heading up e-com as well. So made my choices about media wearing that sort of broad lens, but encountered, I guess, a little bit of that discrimination against e-com channels like, Amazon and others, where they're viewed in the larger organization to be, specifically focused on that channel. So looking forward to this discussion based on what I encountered and what I see from the challenger brand perspective.
Wonderful. And Kelsey, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So Kelsey Johnston, Director of US E-commerce at COTY Global Beauty. I support across, consumer beauty division, luxury division, and direct-to-consumer businesses here at COTY. Really focused on trying to not only future-proof the organization, but also accelerate digital, build this omni-channel architecture within the company that everybody's trying to do across the industry. Prior to joining COTY, was at Walmart e-commerce for a few years, where I supported the category management businesses within beauty. Prior to that, across buying and planning sort of traditional functions at Saks, as well as Macy's.com. And across all of those experiences, lived through omni-channel transformations, digital transformations, and all of that. So really interesting to kind of see how everything has continued to evolve over the last few years.
No, it's so great to have all of you. Again, we've got retailer exposure, insurgent brand exposure, big brand exposure across the panel. So just excited to get into it today. So having talked about, and again, we're not trying to force a framework on anyone, but this really helped bucket a lot of the things that we're always talking about, and even some that maybe we don't talk enough about. I'd love to find out from each of you which impact, either displayed here or maybe touched on or teased here, is most important to you, or from your vantage point. It could be also just an opinion of what you think is most important, whether or not we've fully captured it as an industry thus far. And Kelsey, I'll start with you, just leading the charge for an awesome set of brands. Which one of these impacts do you think is actually most important?
Yeah, sure. So I think the easy answer is that they're all important because they all work together for this kind of symbiotic.
Wait.
Don't worry, I'll go deeper.
All of the above.
I'll go deeper. But if I had to pick just one, for me, I think it would be this social validation piece. Today, I think we're seeing every aspect of retail switching from sort of exercising transactions to building experience and customer relationships and all of that. So all the research is telling us that the number one driver of choice and path to purchase is really that community validation from friends and family. So it's not just what your television or your Instagram is telling you to buy. And I think these elements of community combined with sort of contextualized feedback loops exist across commerce today. So in stores, that's with associates. Online, I think it's like ratings and reviews, but we haven't yet cracked what this means for the future of omni-channel advertising and media spend. So I have to imagine it evolves into more of a two-way conversation than a one-way encouragement of purchase in the future.
No, that's great. John, what about you? Since you have you have multiple brands from different companies.
Exactly. And I think, Chris, you and I have talked about this before, but I got to go with media value as my color blue. So, again, we've talked about this over the years. I encountered this first at Buy when I was heading up, a $30 million advertising budget. And I was making decisions to deploy that across linear TV, outdoor, programmatic media on an exchange using Oracle's targeting, buying Facebook and Google. And oh, by the way, this media platform, Amazon, and investing in all those platforms, discovered, this Amazon, platform based on first-party signals, because they're selling my product and know exactly who's purchasing it. I'm getting a better ROI and more impact from that across everything I do. And when I track it and via things like brand awareness. But then when I go to switch more money into this effective channel, I talk to my CFO, and the CFO says, no, you can't do that. That's your e-commerce spend in your e-commerce P&L. If you put money there, you're going to be underwater in your P&L. And the the challenge of that was like, so wait a second, I don't look at it as my channel. And his frame of view of the world was really driven by legacy media and the world pre-digital and the framework that created. And I have to tell you, I see that encounter across all my portfolio brands today, even digital upstarts. The leadership still looks at Amazon, a platform like Amazon or Instacart, and they say, well, those are trade spend like I've experienced with Walmart and Target. So therefore, I view them differently and bottom of the funnel. And I have always found it's mid and upper funnel impacts of these medias that are incredibly powerful. So those are some additional thoughts.
No, it's great. And the funny, I kind of try to be snarky because I know there's a little bit more behind this than meets the eye. But how is it that all these large companies also who view some of those barriers, and we'll dig into those a little bit here, buy and acquire the digital brands that somehow overcame them, right? So somehow we used retail media to build a brand that was worth acquiring, and then we stopped them from building brands with the thing that helped them become so valuable. Like, I know that sounds silly, but sometimes just stating that out loud gets kind of an intro. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, but
it's exactly true. And if I'd say there's one strategy that we're seeing incredibly effective, I mean, again, from our perspective on the venture side, we're seeing brands accelerate in the food, beverage, and CPG space to a much more rapid degree than we've ever seen. And what I would tell you, platforms like retail media, again, we've seen online shopping move. I was looking at Bricks meets Clicks data, and there were 2 billion online US sales prior to the pandemic. In February this year, there were 8 billion. So 4x the number of consumers purchasing on these platforms, explosions. These are consumers spending a lot of time with these channels, both in not just to purchase, but to discover and learn more. Mid and upper funnel opportunities, but we still categorize these channels as bottom of the funnel conversion, trade, shopper marketing areas.
Well, no, and you maybe you can add some color later too as we get into it, but I always loved your point about the value of Prime Day and Amazon, inflection points even versus the impact of the Super Bowl. And what's interesting is, what's the only difference arguably now between the Super Bowl and Amazon Prime Day? It's that a retailer owns the latter one, right? So
Yep.
I'm not saying everybody goes and advertises at the Super Bowl, but somehow a $5.4 million TV copy slot during the Super Bowl doesn't get questioned. I know that's not true, but doesn't get as scrutinized as a media investment that actually has direct impact. So we'll dig into that today. Molly, what about you? What do you think is the most important, having been a part of the framing of this model?
So we didn't plan this, but I have another choice that hasn't been talked about before, which is offline sales. So it's great that we all have something unique to contribute. When I was on the CPG side, we knew that there were these things happening that were forming relationships between e-commerce and quote unquote offline sales. So for example, we were seeing behaviors like showrooming, where people were using the physical store as a means of investigating a product, but then buying it online because that's more convenient. We were seeing things like Target merchandising part of their cosmetics with things that were trending on Pinterest. We were seeing people price shopping online when they were in a physical retail environment. And now we're seeing physical retail environments being used as fulfillment centers for online transactions. And so more and more and more, we have more evidence that this relationship between online purchase and offline purchase, or online advertising and offline purchase, or anything that you do on any retail media site and anything that you do offline in a physical store exists. And I think it's only going to become more apparent as these big retailers like Walmart start to merge their technology teams in store and online. And as we see more of the relationship between the traditional components of offline and online merge, this idea that anything you do online, including spend advertising dollars, impacts your offline business is going to be obnoxiously apparent.
No, and what's from multiple sources I've seen, that it shouldn't surprise us because it was actually true pre-COVID as well, is that over half of all growth in global marketplaces will be driven by direct e-com, omni, click and collect, home delivery sales. But if you apply some of those conservative stats on what influence sales were on top of that, it's actually like 85% plus of all sales to be added over the next several years will be e-com influenced, if not also in e-com. So again, I know that that's fragmented across a lot of key players, Amazon, Alibaba globally, Walmart, others, larger shares of that, but it's what about that isn't invest to grow, in my humble opinion.
And
right?
Areas to watch, Instacart, right? Like,
no, exactly.
How do you classify increase spending and I'm sure increased capability in Instacart advertising?
No,
and I mean, I just jump in there like Instacart, we could spend an hour on that one because I've recently encountered nobody knows where to fit Instacart in. I had one of our brands had a great e-com leader begin to test it. His CFO said, well, wait a second, why are you handling that in e-com? That drives physical retail sales. But he tested it and then had some great initial success. We came up to budgeting. And across the organization, the shopper team, the trade team, the brand team, the marketing team, no one funded Instacart. And the e-com guy, he came back to me and he said, the problem was nobody owned it and nobody knew where to classify it. And that is a huge challenge for Instacart today, even despite—
Everyone cares, but no one owns it. The first thing Instacart tried to sell us at Mars 6 years ago on Sand Hill Road was a sponsored aisle. Like you Mars could decorate this aisle with M&Ms or whatever. But and what you're trying to do is incentivize a digital shopping behavior that's actually a physical shopping, move. Like again, at Mars at that time, we're like, who pays for this?
Exactly.
No, I mean, so this kind of starts tipping into some of the barriers. So I don't want to spend all of our time on problems because we're actually a lot of us are solving some of those problems, or maybe again, our attempt with this framework was to help align a discussion that could start being apples to apples. So we could have, I'm okay being wrong. I just want to make sure I was wrong together, right? That we were wrong. We had the right discussion and we figured out what the right objective was, the right solution was. So with so much potential value, and each of you talked about a different aspect of what this framework pulls together, what are the barriers that we're really brushing up against or banging our head against to date, and even this year with the acceleration of COVID pushing more people into it? We're still facing some of these, come to reality moments of like, how do I do it now that I have to do it, right? So what are the barriers that we're kind of facing? So John, why don't we start with you?
I think a major barrier is there's been so much change in my world, food, beverage, CPG. In the last 30 years, everything has changed in terms of the way these companies make money. And so many of the big ones are used to the old model and the way they focused and the way they organized. Yet digital, like we've seen across so many spaces, has blown up all of that. And Instacart is a classic example. People are thinking, I remember an analogy when we had train transportation and people invented the car. Well, the first cars they invented had cow catchers in the front because people think that way. And the organization of these large companies is built for a legacy world, physical retail world. And I see challenger brands who don't have those constraints. They're going after Instacart. They just say, this thing has a 10x ROAS, which, by the way, I saw in a meeting a week ago. And that's just accounting for what we can see, not the buy it again functionality, which you two have talked about, which is almost acquiring a customer and getting them to repeat. 10x ROAS, but large organizations, where does this fit? I can't figure out what group to put it in or who to account for it. And I'm like, I don't care what group goes in it. It's rocking it. And so it's right for our company. So we do it. So I think organizationally, we've been structured for a legacy world.
Because we don't know who owns it, we should just not do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't fit. So, hey, skip it.
Yeah, I know. We'll get to it next year, right? We'll figure that out on the next planning cycle. Kelsey, what about you? What are some additional barriers you're seeing?
Yeah, I think for me, there's three. First and foremost, John, I think you're totally right about all of the legacy piece, but it's a lack of understanding about where brands' dollars are going. So the traditional mindset of this ROI optimization has very much been like dollar in, dollar out. And Chris, to your point earlier, like we've never properly measured the full picture. And it's no one's fault. They haven't had to because many of today's executives also didn't grow up on it. So I'd argue really in the last 5 years, it's been fully redefined. The infrastructure has been redefined. And even as a self-proclaimed millennial, I find the new landscape to be a bit of a snake pit. But I think second, there can be a hesitation on betting big with either unknown platforms, forums, or retailers, be that new retailers or international markets, underdeveloped partnerships, or maybe this whole new world of social commerce as well, because everyone in digital is, of course, very keen on this test and learn mindset. But I think where we get a little hamstrung is we know you have to bet big to see impact. And oftentimes, like test guardrails are built for small tests versus tests of scale. So it does tend to take some time to get that flywheel turning. And then I think the third thing to address is kind of like the elephant in the room with a year of COVID and massive shifts in the landscape for social justice and equality. Like brands have had to be very thoughtful. So like, first of all, many have faced budget cuts. So when they do have opportunities to spend, they want to spend on what works because the margin of error is very small and it's a nebulous media landscape and there's shareholders to answer to. So that certainly makes it tough. But then as far as like the social and cultural landscape is concerned in the US today, brands have been challenged in a really good way to think consciously with a really deep scrutiny and some sensitivity as to where and when advertising is appropriate when there's a much larger conversation happening in the world today.
No, I'll say, I won't name the brand, but there was a very prominent food and beverage brand on a sign that said it was like COVID something here or something. It got shared everywhere, but it was like they sponsored a COVID sign, which just didn't really at the time was like too soon. Obviously now you want to be part of the solution and getting everybody getting vaccinated, but it was a little bit too timely. But 100%, it's where do I show up in the right way, depending on my category and the need states of my shoppers that is appropriate in light of all these extra sensitivities that we need to be factoring in.
And you have to, I think, filter that decision making through a lot of different perspectives too, right? It's like gone are the days of sitting in a room and having one person sign off on something. You really do need to have kind of this different feedback loop from the entire organization to see what's appropriate.
100%. Molly, what are some other ones? Because obviously we're engaging a lot of different brands across companies, so we get to see a bridge of commonalities and unique challenges. What do you see as barriers?
I want to underline some things that actually Kelsey and John have already raised under the umbrella of agility. So one thing that I see quite often that I've experienced personally is the need to be 100% right. And Kelsey underlined this a little bit. So big organizations are used to moving slowly on long time horizons and having the luxury of being right or being sure, or, researching and researching and researching again and deciding and meeting and deciding to meet and then meeting to decide. And right now in this environment, you need to take directional bets. I have said in the past, it is better to be directionally right and specifically wrong than the opposite. It's better to be 70% right and, 500% faster, right? You just can't be slow and sure anymore. And that comes down to speed as well, right? So you cannot figure it out in the next planning cycle. I would make an analogy to real estate. So if I notice a real estate property that is a particularly good deal due to COVID circumstances, and you say to me, Molly, that is a great deal, but I will do that in the back half of the year, right? It's a different circumstance. It's a different opportunity. The marketplace has changed. What we see in the world in terms of e-retail media, online opportunities, e-commerce, and what gets in the way of it are these two old behaviors, which is the need to be 100% right and being too slow.
I try to just be right every time I say something, and that way I get around it. No, but you're right. No, and that's what's so interesting too, is I've gotten into some, I would say, very healthy debates with extremely smart media experts inside companies who any day of the week would wipe the floor with me any day on media. I'm not here to say I know more about media and media measurement than you. I'm trying to get to the way we're doing it between the two isn't comparative right now. So thus you're dismissing, right? Like to John's point about the Instacart thing, we don't know where to put it, so we won't do it at all, right? We weren't measuring retail media effectively because we weren't investing effectively, or in a way that we didn't adjust our model to capture it. So thus we didn't measure it at all. Thus we don't see it. Thus we can't make future decisions about it.
I heard Melissa Burdick say that Amazon is maybe going to surprise people with what day Prime Day is. This reminds me of it's opposite day. So they surprise us, the marketplace, with Prime Day. And then your organization doesn't know which part of it needs to activate, and you're not sure. And so no one does anything. There goes the opportunity, people, right? Come on.
Every day is Prime Day.
Exactly. I mean, Molly, that point about everybody wants to be sure and have certainty. And I think that's a brilliant point. And I see it all the time. And I see it in terms of this reliance on bottom of the funnel performance. Everybody can see, what they can see is the ROAS measure. And when you talk to anybody who understands advanced commercial mix modeling, multi-touch attribution, we had Mike Menkes from Analytic Partners on the Digital Shelf Institute, and he described this very eloquently, that it doesn't work. The systems of attribution that are in place are as effective as the click that we saw in the year 1997, which didn't correlate at all with purchases.
That was a good year. Don't knock.
Was that a good year? Exactly. And it's like ROAS is an entirely misleading measure, and he pointed out that, if you're measuring in search return, well, you've got to understand there was a stimulus for somebody to search. When I ran a TV spot, I understood that people searched and all the attribution went to search. Everybody wants certainty, and they want to point to things like return on ad spend. And they, the rest of it, attribution, is foggy, and they don't like foggy. That doesn't help them talk to their CMO. And so you have to have a sense of willingness to go with uncertainty to take some of these moves that allow for rapid acceleration. I mean, that's what I've seen.
Well, one other thing that I would love to get your take, because this kind of plays into measurement, but not just measurement, but accountability, right? Like what we're measured on is a challenge. Now, I say this isn't calling anyone out, because it's nobody's fault. It was the way things were modeled and designed in the past. But I've had many a media agency recommend against retail media investment. But if you asked a few questions in your head, why would they do that when they know where the world is going? Oh, wait, how are they measured? Oh, they get paid on how much I spend with them. If I don't spend it with them and I spend it with Amazon or directly with Walmart Connect or something, not to say I can't spend through the media agency, but if I had a scaled enough partnership, I don't actually need the media agency because I'm really working one-to-one with the retailer and their ad network, they lose money, right? So they may not even be consciously going, oh my gosh, I'm losing money, I need to counter this with a different recommendation. It's inherently, when anything threatens what we have and how we're measured for success, we push back a little bit against it. Even though most of us have learned that that's just part of our job, we have to constantly evolve. There are a lot of people that aren't being challenged to do that every day. So the how we're measured is a critical piece. And that kind of even goes back to your point about, John, about the clear owner, right? I saw a stat from last year, 62% of CPG organizations said there was no clear owner of retail media in their organization. I'm sure that some of that's been a little bit solved for, so maybe the number's a little depressed since in fall of last year, but that is a problem. There's no one who owns the accountability for making a decision between one or the other. Like, John, you get to kind of do that, which is a nice, I don't mean it's perfect role, but it's a nice aggregation of two sets of objectives, right? So do you have any,
exactly.
John, what do you think about that from I would say a non-malintended bias, right? It's very much just the way things kind of got here.
Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, the way I see what you're describing is, I deal with a lot of great agencies focused on retail media, and they tend to emphasize bottom of the funnel. And that's kind of a couple reasons. One is because larger packaged goods brands are coming to them because that's what they specialize in. And then B, there's more certainty in providing those numbers. So anytime you're talking about more tactics that might be mid or upper funnel, like DSP programmatic, or in Amazon's case, Fire Tablet or OTT, that is a real risk, and it's a real struggle because the metrics get fuzzier, And so you've got human nature telling you, as soon as they're pushed back on by a client who says, well, I don't like, how is that really? Does that really have an effect? And what we learn from commercial mix modeling is these are long-term effects. If you stop OTT or DSP programmatic mid and upper funnel, if you stop it tomorrow, a lot of my brands will say, look, I stopped it and nothing happened. My bottom level conversion ROAS stayed the same. It's not until 2 months later and 3 months later and 4 months later where the demand generation starts creeping down. And they say, gee, what happened? My growth and my metrics on the bottom line disappeared. So there's a lot of human nature struggles we're dealing with here.
Kelsey, what do you think?
Yeah, John, I think you're right. And the other piece of it too, like it's in part ownership, but it's in part kind of what we were talking about before, this like organizational upskilling. So you have these companies where there's people from so many backgrounds, so many walks of lives and experiences and all of these things. And at what point do we say it's like e-commerce or digital functions opportunity to then explain to the rest of the organization why things are important? And by the way, like, what does that look like? Because there's no playbook for that today. Every organization is at a different place in their digital journey. But at the same time, these digital decisions and these full funnel decisions that are being made, they affect the sales teams, they affect the marketing teams, they affect the retailers. So how can we figure out ways to, create education and therefore accountability across everyone and not just the digital media teams for the decisions that are being made?
Well, anything to add there that you've seen across the spectrum here?
No, I think that was a really well-rounded discussion.
The one that's, I come back to this and it's not, I didn't make it up. So I can only credit all the brilliant basics that have been published and profounded by many smart people, but we are what we measure, right? And so I that sounds so easy to say, but like having been in brand in my past life before volunteering as tribute into e-com, I was like 2 or 3 degrees away from actual financial performance. I don't mean I didn't own it. It don't mean I wasn't measured on it, but it was easy in brand to go, oh, the trade, the sales team, they didn't activate right. I didn't hit my goals, right? It was because Walmart had that big fumble at the end of the year. Like, was it? Like, now, yeah, sometimes there was a one-off, like supply chain, we couldn't supply it, or so there was some real tangible point at issue. But a lot of times we weren't owning the short and the long-term metrics because we were a little bit removed. Whereas then the sales team arguably was very, very close and maybe almost too minutely attached to it. So there has to be, and that's why there's also the question about global teams, right? Like, how does a global team adding value to my local team? Because they're farther removed from my actual local KPIs. Well, in a perfect world, I'm not trying to make it overly simple, change the KPIs, right? If you change what a board and a C-suite is measured on, they will change what they enable the company to do. They don't have to know how to do it yet, but they will. If
Chris,
you
something we have talked about specifically along the lines of KPIs is short-term and long-term KPIs, or having KPIs in different time horizons. And right now, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of mismatch between KPIs and budgeting, meaning we are having to do, or brand manufacturers, brands are having to do a lot of long-term budgeting and short-term KPIs, where in fact they should really have the ability to do short-term budgeting and
long-term KPIs.
Right. Yeah, with leading and lagging, right? Because, and what I always love too is like, I own a sales and a share number. You don't own that. You can't control that. What you can control are leading actions that can be measured by leading indicators, like, share of search, or availability percent, or, or ROAS as one of, there are lots of different leading metrics that guide us to the lagging metric, which is sales and share and long-term equity and customer lifetime value. And so it's also being able to articulate that I don't own the outcome, I own the inputs that get me the outcome. And so,
and I mean, just to that point, again, I'm seeing misaligned KPIs. Again, it's like I see somebody who owns marketplaces in one of my larger brands. That person owns a marketplace. Another person owns the direct-to-consumer channel. Another person owns the brand channel. Those people are all conflicting with each other. They're all fighting over strategies, or saying, oh, I don't want money going to mid or upper funnel. This is coming from the marketplace person. I want it all going to lower funnel because that's certainty, and I understand that. The brand person not getting what the marketplace person is saying. And they don't all have one goal, aligned KPI to create growth for the brand. And Molly, separate to your point about budgeting, again, I see that long-term budgeting where my analogy is, I'm a Giants fan, and in 1980, Phil Simms would go, as a quarterback, would go to the line of scrimmage and he had his plays called out, like the 20 plays called. Today, when you see Tom Brady go to the line of scrimmage, he's got probably 5 different protection packages, 3 different run options, multiple play options, and he's reading the defense in real time to call it that second. What I see with challenger brands is the same on budgets. I was in a meeting yesterday with one of my fastest growing brands, and we're just saying, okay, number one, we're going to add budget here. We're seeing this particular social media channel work explosively. Boom, we're shifting. We're adding budget here. Our numbers increased. We're doing this. We are calling an audible in real time every week when we're seeing the data. It's not some plan we created last October, which is what I see at larger brands. So interesting points.
What's interesting about that to me too is that if you were to unpack the common objective that those 3 departments should share, it probably sits in a longer time horizon.
Yes.
Right? So it's probably something like growth. So you can ask yourself, you look at the minutia of the exact thing they're trying to measure across departments. So communications is trying to measure share of voice, and then brand, and then you say to yourself, so why is that important? And they would all 3 get to growth ultimately, but they would have to measure it on a longer time horizon versus a shorter time horizon. So we're almost unwilling to create the structures that would allow us to have common measurement, like shorter budgeting bets and longer time horizon measurements.
Yep.
Yeah, and in terms of structure too, it almost makes you wonder about incentive structures, because you think about like in the physical brick and mortar world, right? Like in past lives, you have an entire organization that's trying to deliver on a company's goals, but you have within the organization people in charge of families of business for which they want to optimize their own revenue. So how do we get to a place where we say it's about the whole, and if we have to shift space, and if I'm shrinking my footprint to help somebody else whose business is growing, ultimately that helps the long-term KPI of the organization, because we're shifting based on what we're seeing at a macro level within the industry. But I don't know that it's been built in a way today that people are operating in such a fluid mindset.
So we're starting to get into a really important way that I think we can close out our conversation today, because I never want to submit problems without some level of how I think. I don't have the silver bullet, but how do we solve for these, or how have we solved for these? So we're starting to kind of lay out some ideas around from from an accountability and a measurement perspective, how we could organize. And so we can keep talking to that. But Kelsey, why don't we start with you? What are some ways you've seen either in your own experience or others start to overcome some of the different barriers we were talking about: ownership, accountability, measurement, accounting and P&L practices? Anything within those realms is fair game.
Yeah, I do think what the industry has done, and call it the last 3 to 5 years, to shift into new formats has been really amazing. So I don't believe that print is dead. I don't believe that TV is going anywhere anytime soon, but it's been really cool to witness this move into less traditional transactional models and more into this like personalized lifestyle messaging. So John, you mentioned it earlier, but we see the work that Amazon is doing with OTT, like their over the top video ads, which they've recently come out and said they're able to touch over 55 million people monthly, which is wild. It's like 17% of the United States, but
yeah. It's exploding in the pandemic too. I mean,
yeah, right. The timing isn't, I mean, it couldn't be more perfect, but it shows an evolution in thinking ahead, and how, again, while TV has been successful and it won't go anywhere, it looks different now. And people are thinking about how they're meeting customers there. And I think as the world of advertising is getting smarter, it's future-proofing more effectively. And I think it'll continue to do so, especially as new social commerce formats emerge as well.
Molly, what do you think? What are some additional ways?
If I had to be directional, I would say, number one, put your commerce and media teams in the same group and reward them for a combined outcome and have them make bets together. And then number two, put a portion of your budget against a directional outcome and allow for specific bets at moments in time. Say, this is a budget dedicated to category growth. This is a budget dedicated to whatever it is. And then be super rigorous about the outcome, but super flexible about the tactics. We're often the opposite, right? Like, this budget is for this tactic. This is for an Instagram campaign. And this particular budget is for SEO. And this one is for, like, have a budget again, and then be super rigorous about what ultimately what good looks like, and then more flexible about how you get there.
100%. John, what do you think? What are some other solutions you're seeing out there?
Again, the consumer path to purchase has changed more in the last 15 years than it's changed in the last 75. We saw the inflection point of the internet in 2000 completely changed broadband penetration, the launch of the iPhone, the way consumers discover, find, purchase products is completely different now. And on top of that, I see large companies growing at a much slower rate than these upstart challenger brands. Nielsen has found that, IRI has found that. These born digital challenger brands are not organized like their legacy older brothers. And what I personally experienced was closer to what Molly said. When I was at Buy, I was working closely with the CEO, and no one cared about departments, and we were just making decisions on growth and what was right for the company. So I'd say more of these hybrid, I don't even know if you need a separate e-commerce from media. I mean, like, when I look at what I was doing, I was making just decisions that were right for the organization and allocating things across. It's more of a flexible position, more of a flexible organization. What I see in the silos that have been organized and legacy organizations don't function and are creating, huge barriers to success, because they fight with each other. So it's more of this hybrid approach that is kind of blowing up the old organization and creating more of sort of this omni view of how you organize and make decisions.
And I'll build on one thing I saw that was, it's not going to solve for the overall issue of not having everyone aligned to like the holistic goal together. But what was interesting, it's a very large company. I'll leave them anonymous to protect themselves, but obviously this can be a page you lift out of their book. They would cut budgets every quarter. Everyone had to contribute to some sort of 10% budget cut, which doesn't sound that new to anyone. But instead of it just dropping to the bottom line because arguably we weren't achieving a goal, which might have been the prompt, it was thrown back up for everyone to go pitch for with better ideas. And because everyone had a chance to bring their idea they cut back to the table, if that was really that good, or a new idea surged back, we got to go invest in something in the short term that ultimately netted out to everyone winning together. And so I know a peer of mine at this company was frustrated with the fact that their budget got cut and their idea got cut. That was one of the things they'd been planning, but they ultimately got their bonus because a better idea surfaced and the money went to that and the company achieved the goal. And this was a large company. So I always find it, I'm not saying there aren't going to be instances because of calls to the market that we have to achieve certain profitability and numbers, but a lot of times it's like, how are we babysitting these stats right now as we slowly degrade the company away, as opposed to take the money, I didn't deliver this quarter, I'm going to double down so I never have a quarter I don't deliver again, right? And I know that's easy to say, it's another thing to practice, but it was interesting to see a company practice that, where yet everyone contributes to cuts, but the cut comes back to somebody and everybody then wins. And so if that's helpful, if you're in a big company, that was a way a big company countered this issue of not being aligned to one set of goals. But any other solutions we haven't covered that might open some eyes to ways that we could solve for this in big and small organizations?
Yeah, just this one thing that's going to fix everything, Chris.
Perfect.
I'm kidding. I don't know.
We save that for the end.
Yeah, no, I think it's like, it all comes down to data and upskilling, right? So it's like, we have to sort the house with the foundational elements of measurement, which is totally an exercise in demolition and construction, but it's worth the short-term pain for the long-term benefits. And yeah, it's just upskilling those who didn't grow up with it, so everyone's getting smarter together and the whole organization can move forward.
And Kelsey, I'll tell you, I love that, because being in education now for e-commerce and whatever comes next is near and dear to my heart. What I found is upskilling is part of inspiring people who maybe weren't informed or weren't motivated to become interested in further seeking and retaining the information that they need at all levels. I use this silly example. If I said I would give $1 million as a prize to anyone who can answer a question of my choosing, but you could use any tool you needed to get the answer, I would ask you the question, you probably Google it, because right in your hand, you have every answer in the world. Almost any education you need is sitting right there. But without that motivation, without that measurement or that opportunity that you can benefit from, or potentially a risk, right? I'll take $1 million from you if you can't answer this question. You may not seek the information because it's all sitting there. So it's that, Kelsey, to your point, it's that balance of education and the incentive to seek it and retain it and use it, which is why, again, a Walmart merging their buying teams suddenly aligns an organization not to conflict with store preservation and online growth, but to evolve a store for omni-channel growth, right? So, and again, the sales teams now responding to what Walmart wants from them, all running around like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I wasn't doing e-com before. And now I know the Walmart teams are very much seeking education because they're being held accountable. So it's like, how do we offer education so that when they're ready to seek it with right KPIs, they go get it? And then, but we have to have it there ready for them too. So it's a delicate balance I've seen internally. Well, I think we're at a good point to wrap up, but this conversation will never end. We will continue to fight the good fight. I would highly recommend you connect with all of our panelists, practitioner leaders in this space, as they would love to help you, I'm sure, and connect with you, and I'm sure you'll help them. We all learn all from each other all the time. I wanted to thank ClickZ and their community for hosting us today, and hope this was a value-added insight and perspective on how you can approach this growing part of digital media spending for long-term omni-channel, both online and offline growth. So thank you three for being a part of our panel today, and thank you all for being engaged with us.